Bonjour à tous. Il y a encore du monde. Bon, je vais commencer. Alors, Jean-Philippe est directeur de recherche au CNRS, DR1. Tu as fait ta thèse en 1998 avec Nathalie Deruel au DARC à Meudon. Ensuite, tu es parti faire un postdoc à l'Université de Genève. Et tu as été recruté en 1999 au CNRS à Orsay dans le laboratoire de physique théorique. Et puis, nous t'avons accueilli en 2004. Le temps passe vite, ça fait 15 ans déjà. Oh là là. Récemment, il a été directeur adjoint de l'Institut Henri Poincaré de 2013 à 2017, donc c'est récent. Il a eu des prix prestigieux, je ne vais pas tout vous dire. Il a fait aussi beaucoup d'enseignements, notamment à M2 à l'ENS, l'école des mines. Qu'est-ce qu'il a fait encore? Il s'implique beaucoup avec les collaborations africaines, notamment avec l'Afrique du Sud, Georges Ellis au Cap, et aussi le réseau AIMS, qui est l'African Institute for Medical Science, Mathematical Science, et donc tu es membre du Scientific Board, donc pour introduire les mathématiques en Afrique. Tu t'impliques aussi beaucoup dans l'association Les Petits Cueilleurs d'Étoiles, dans les hôpitaux. Je crois que tu te déguises en astronaute pour faire passer l'astronomie à ces petits malades. Tu prends aussi le temps d'écrire des livres et puis de la musique, bien sûr. Bon, vous avez compris que c'est une personne très active et productive. On va t'appeler l'homme orchestre aujourd'hui, hein? Voilà, avec tous les instruments. Bon, alors ces thèmes de recherche concernent notamment la cosmologie au sens large, théorie, relation avec les observations. Tu as travaillé sur le CMB, la nucléosynthèse primordiale, le lensing, en essayant de développer des tests de cohérence du modèle cosmologique afin d'en examiner le bien fondé de certaines hypothèses comme le principe copernicien ou la relativité aux échelles cosmologiques. Tu as aussi travaillé sur la gravitation avec une attention particulière au principe d'équivalence et son lien avec les constantes, ce qui nous réunit aujourd'hui, parce que suite au nouveau système d'unité internationale qui sera effectif en mai de cette année, je crois.
Le 20 mai.
Le 20 mai. Il va parler aujourd'hui des constantes fondamentales qui jouent évidemment un rôle central dans la définition des dites unités. Et donc son titre, c'est Constantes fondamentales, nouveau système international et relativité générale. À toi.
Merci beaucoup, Elisabeth. Bon, bonjour à tous. Donc l'idée aujourd'hui, c'est déjà de vous parler de ce qui s'est passé le 16 novembre 2018 à Versailles, et aussi de vous expliquer comment je me suis retrouvé à travailler sur ces histoires de constantes, parce que c'était pas du tout, ça n'avait rien à voir avec les sujets sur lesquels je travaillais, et c'est vraiment le papier de John Webb en 1999 sur cette fameuse constante de structure fine qui aurait varié lors des 5 dernières milliards d'années, alors que je finissais ma thèse et que j'étais en postdoc, donc je suis tombé sur ce PRL où je ne comprenais absolument rien, puisque le mot constante vous dit clairement que ce n'est pas des trucs qui doivent varier dans le temps, donc vous vous posez des questions, et j'ai questionné pas mal de gens, aussi bien des physiciens théoriciens qui me disaient mais de toute façon c'est de l'astrophysique, donc 10-5, blablabla, bon bref, ok, tu vas pas perdre ton temps à regarder ça, et puis aussi bien avec des astrophysiciens, savoir qu'est-ce que c'était que cette mesure, et discuter avec Elisabeth, avec Patrick Petitjean, pour comprendre finalement comment on faisait cette mesure, et peu à peu de se dire mais finalement c'est quoi ces constantes, pourquoi est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui passent de leur temps à essayer de vérifier qu'elles sont constantes, puisque dans le dictionnaire c'est marqué que c'est constant. Donc c'est un peu comme ça que ça a commencé, et donc aujourd'hui ce que je vais essayer de vous expliquer, c'est déjà ce qui s'est passé le 16 novembre, le choix qu'on a fait, pourquoi il y avait un besoin de changer la définition du système international d'unité, quel a été le choix du Congrès général des... Oh, sorry, je dois parler en anglais? Sorry, excuse me. Je shift. When I gave my talk in Versailles on the 16th of November, some people came to me and said, "You are French, and you know this is an official language of the Congrès Général des Poids et Mesures. You should have been talking in French." So sorry, I was not in the right universe. No, I was just in another universe where everyone was speaking French. It happens. So yes, I will come back on the choice made by the GPM and try to explain the role of fundamental constant. And as you will see, we will have to ask a lot of questions about these objects that we find in books, fundamental constant. What are they? What are their role in physics? And then I will try to come back on their link with the equivalence principle and gravity and advertise a little bit on the work we have been doing here for about 15 years now. So let us start by the system of units before the 16th of November. And one of the issues was the definition of the kilogram. Since 1889, the definition of the kilogram was based on the artifact, the international prototype of the kilogram that was kept in Sèvres. So you have a picture of this kilogram here. This is a picture by Robert Doisneau. And you see that it is conserved under vacuum and it's very well protected. And there are several copies of this, what we call IPK, so International Prototype of the Kilogram. And basically, when you measure a mass, what you measure is a comparison of this mass to the mass of this IPK. So any measurement is a comparison between two objects. You can compare the mass of this, the copies of the IPK. So in 1889, they were all calibrated to have exactly the same mass. And over the year, what you see is that there is a drift in the different masses of these different copies of the IPK. The question is which one is drifting, which one is remaining constant, that you cannot tell. By definition, the IPK is just 1 kilo, so its mass doesn't change with time. And you see that you have a drift which is of the order of 40 microgram on a kilogram on a length scale of, let's say, a century. So it drifts, and with this definition, you cannot do better. There is no way you define the kilogram. So you have to think about what is a kilogram. That was the first problem. The second problem is coming from electric units, and in particular, the definition of the ampere. I don't know whether you remember the old definition of the ampere. It's impossible to remember, actually. It's the fact that you take two infinite conductors, infinitely thin, with 1 meter apart, and you want the current of 1 ampere to be the current such that the force between these two conductors is exactly 2 Newton. Okay? So that's the definition of the ampere. The point is that this is a very nice definition, but it's not practical. You cannot do that in a laboratory. There is nothing like an infinite conductor, infinitely thin. And so what people did in recent metrology is to define the ampere and the resistance through the quantum Hall effect and the Josephson effect. So basically, the ampere was related to two fundamental constants, the charge of the electron and the Planck constant. But what was done in the laboratory was outside the definition of the International System of Units. So one goal was to bring back the electrical unit inside the International System of Units. So basically, this is what has been driving the new definition of the system of units. So you see, we have an artifact, the kilogram, and the kilogram enters the definition of the mole of the ampere. We had the second, which is defined by quantum transition. The meter, which is related to the second since 1983, and the fact that we have defined its value through via the Planck constant. And this electric unit that you want to be back. So basically, the idea is to get a system of units in which you don't have any physical artifacts, and in which the electrical units are defined in the same way that the meter and the second are defined. It's important here to note that in the International System of Units after 1983, the value of the speed of light is fixed, and also the value of the permeability of the vacuum, mu naught, in the definition of the ampere, which means that both mu naught, and so the permeability and the permittivity, were fixed in the definition of the unit. So already we had some fundamental constants which were fixed, the value of which were fixed in the system of units. And then there are other issues, the Kelvin. So the Kelvin is defined with respect to an arbitrary constant, which is the triple point of water. Again, how do you realize with high enough precision the triple point of water? It was a problem actually to get in the temperature metrology. And then there was a problem with the mole. The funny thing, I don't know whether you've seen, but in many French papers after the 16th of November, they talk about the mole as la taupe. No, it's true. They translated, the papers from the States and England, and they were that we were thinking, we debated about the mole and we debated about the taupe in Versailles, which is, okay. But. So what is important is that the definition of the mole depends on the kilogram because this was the number of atoms in 12 grams of carbon-12. But you see, from a theoretical physics point of view, quantity of matter and mass are different objects like mass and weight. They are different quantities. So it would be nice to have a definition in which you do not mix the two concepts of quantity of matter and of mass. And this is what has been done. And now we will have basically we will fix fundamental constants so that we just have one single clock. So here is a system we had before. We had the definition for all the base units, and from this base unit you can define all other secondary units. And here again there is a whole history about how to define this unit. Just to give you an example, and this is very interesting in the way we think about measurement. The liter, for instance. So the liter first was defined as 1 decimeter cube. And in 1901, we redefined it as the volume of water at the maximum of its density under 1 atmosphere. And actually, is it equal exactly to 1 decimeter cube? No, it was not. And then in 1965, if I remember back, we went back to the definition of the volume in terms of decimeter cube. So you see, all these things have to be thought because what you want is that all these definitions, they are consistent and they allow you to reach the highest possible accuracy when you realize your units in the laboratory. So the idea in the new system of definition is to go from this situation where you have different definitions for the base units and from which you were able to measure the value of some fundamental constant with some uncertainty to a system in which you will fix the numerical value of fundamental constants, so the Planck constant, the speed of light, the charge of the electron, the Boltzmann constant, charge of the electron, the Boltzmann constant, and you will have a clock to define the second. And as you can see, the mole is completely disconnected from the other units. And this is normal. This is not a unit. It's like there is 12 eggs in a dozen of eggs. This is exactly what is a mole. So what the idea is to fix the Avogadro number. And the candela, I will not talk about the candela because it's not a true unit. It depends on it's related to the properties of the human eyes. It's a measurement of the luminous flux as seen by our eye. So we can completely forget about this thing. There is this constant which is related to the way we perceive different colors in our eye. So I will focus on these 4 units here, 5 units, and you see we have to fix 1, 2, 3, 4 constants so that they are all related, they all derive from the second. And again, so now everything will be somehow related to quantum physics. And the question is, what are these constants that we are using here? So that's one of the major steps. And as you see, everything depends on the clock. And this is also very beautiful because one of the things we learn in general relativity is that the only thing you can measure is your proper time, so the time made by your clock. There is no way you measure a distance. So the definition of 1983 was really a good definition also in that sense from a theoretical point of view. Okay, so this is what has been proposed on the 16th of November. You can find the text. It's both in French and in English. And you see that we fix the exact value of this fundamental constant. And we say that the Kelvin, the Coulomb, the Ampere, and so on are the units such that the value of this fundamental constant have this numerical value. And this is what was voted on the 16th of November at unanimity. And I think Sébastien Candel, who was the president of the Science Academy, said that it was the first time he saw Iran and United States vote yes for the same thing, which is a good thing. So now you have to think about what it will change for us. So before, you were defining the units and you were able to measure the value of fundamental constant with a given uncertainty. So now we have fixed the value of this constant, so there is no uncertainty on these quantities. But there are other properties, such as the kilogram. Now we'll have an uncertainty. The permittivity of the vacuum, they will have an uncertainty. And the triple point of water will have an uncertainty. So what you do is that you shift the uncertainty you had on fundamental constant on the realization of your units. Indeed, because a measurement is always a comparison, in the end it doesn't change anything, but it changes everything in the way you think about measurements and the way you think about fundamental constants. So this one is in French. It's the one that I use for CNRS when they ask me what it changes. So and there is some, so sorry about that, but basically this is the fact that now you go to the ideal of theory, you are really using the most advanced theoretical physics knowledge to define your system of units. And I will tell you why this has been argued for many years that this is the way we should define fundamental constant. And also the definition, you see, they said we fix the value, the numerical value of some constant. It doesn't say how you measure this fundamental constant. So it doesn't depend on a precise technology, which means that if we improve the technology, well, we will have a better realization of the units without having to change the definitions. And now also, it's very important, all the energy units will be equal, and they will not be error bars if you go from MeV, for instance, to Kelvin or to joules. You know, you have always conversion factors which are KB, C square, H, and so on. So now, because the fundamental constants are exactly defined, it means that all energy units will have the same uncertainty. They will all be equal. And this is also very important when we talk about energy. So from a practical point of view, it changes nothing in our daily life. But for a conceptual point of view, it changes almost everything. And now the question, which has been asked many times, is how do we explain that? In particular, what is a constant? What is a kilo? So for instance, I've been discussing with people from the dictionary, how do you define kilogram in the dictionary? Because the definition is wrong, and we cannot just put the definition that we had, that is in the text of law from the 16th of November, because it's entangled with many other definitions. So where is the incertitude gone? I mean, for you who are physicists, you understand that it's in the realization of the physical system of units, but for normal people, it's very difficult to understand. And so it's very abstract, but us, we have the advantage that for many years we have been talking about distance in light year. And basically, this is what we have been doing, talking about distances in terms of light, of time. How do you talk about mass in terms of time? This is a very, I mean, pedagogically, a very challenging issue. And then, and that was just specially for the CNRS, I think it's very important also to see this evolution, and I will come back on that from the point of view of the history of science, because it shows how much the research and the thinking on a long time scale is important in this evolution. And in particular, the endpoint of this definition is related on discoveries that were not made to that purpose. If someone has asked physicists, define the best system of units, they will not have discovered the Josephson effect, the quantum Hall effect, and many other things that you need. So basically, this is where actually you really need to have this fundamental research, which is still ongoing. It's very interdisciplinary because you have to do quantum, gravity, experiment, and theory all over. And France has played a leading role in that series since 1791, so the first convention of the matter, with many texts from the Academy, the Laboratoire National d'Essais, the Observatory, and of course, the Institute. So that was just for the CNRS, but they're not here today, so you don't care. So now what I'm going to talk about. So this, you see, when you arrive there are a lot of questions that you may ask. So units, a priori, they are completely arbitrary. So how do you define a unit? What is a unit? How do we came to the units we are using today? I said that they are defined in terms of constants. So what are these constants? Can we pick any constant, or what has guided us in the choice of the fundamental constants which are defining the units? And of course, these fundamental constants, they are related to the laws of physics. Are we sure that these laws of physics are correct, and can we test it with such definitions? And are we sure that there will be a long-time stability of the definition of your units and of fundamental constants? So this is what I will try to explain to you. So let me come to the definition of the international system of units. And I think the best place where I found an explanation of what is a measurement, and I discovered that when my son was 6 years old, and I was reading Asterix. So you have to read Asterix. So this is in French, I'm sorry, but there is a translation here. I cannot do Asterix in English. It will be... OK, so a system of units is completely arbitrary. And if you look at the history, it's really anthropomorphic. Just think about units such as the feet, the span, and you know the span is the distance between your finger and the tip of your nose when your arm is like that. And so basically, it depends on some reference system, and most of the time, you don't know what is this reference system. And here you see, this is Astérix aux Jeux Olympiques, and they gave the length of the stadium, so it's 192 meters and 27 centimeters, and they say it's 600 foot of the, now we know who is the reference system, this is Heracles. And so they deduce what is the length of the unit system, so the Heracles foot, and they say from which we deduce that his shoe was about 46 approximately. So this is not a joke, it's very important. It reminds us that any measurement is just a comparison between the system we have used, we have agreed to be a reference system, and the physical system we are studying. And the only thing we are doing is making comparisons, and the result of a comparison is the number of foot. So this is 600, and this is a dimensionless number. It has no units. So this depends on the reference system, and it depends from regions. And if you go back to the French Revolution, they were doing some kind of grand débat, and they had this cahier de doléances, as you know. And if you look at the cahier de doléances, people were asking for one weight, one measure in the whole country. And the reason was purely from economic point of view, because you want to make exchanges. Is what you call a meter in Marseille is this, and in Paris is this. When you want to trade, well, there will be bias. So we needed to have a single units of mass, of length, and of time all over the country. And in the 26th March 1791, there was a beautiful talk by Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand at the Parliament, where he's coming with a proposition from the Academy of Science to define the meter. And he said, well, this will be a fraction of the length of the Earth's meridian. So now we relate the meter to a meridian of our planet, the Earth. Here is a text from the Convention nationale. So for Guillaume, this is the 18 Germinal en 3. Can you translate? The 7th of April, 1795. He defines the meter, and it also said that all other system of units for length are illegal in the country. We have to use the meter. So this is really, I mean, these texts, they are text of law, which means that also the wording of these texts are very important. And then, of course, you had to measure the length of the meridian, and this was the adventure by Delambre et Méchain. And then you define the meter, and in Paris, you have several places with a copy of the meter, and anyone can go there and compare his personal ruler with this étalon, which were all over Paris. This is the one which is just in front of the Senate, so it's still there. And of course, there is a small plaque here on which it's written, à tous les temps, à tous les peuples. So basically, the idea was to define units for everyone. And then there was this evolution, which I go through very fast. So we define the meter as one fraction of the Earth's meridian in 1798. And then we made this prototype, which is 1 meter in platine, and they shift the definition to go back to the artifact. We said this is the length of this prototype. Then you see the definition is becoming a little bit more precise. We say how to measure this. So this is the longer of this, the length of this prototype, but we say what is the temperature, what is the pressure, and how you have to put the ruler so that it's not deformed. So you will gain in precision. And then in 1960, you shift to the wavelength of a transition of krypton 86. And then the major shift comes in 1983. And then people could have done some kind of very clever new definition by setting it to the wavelength of cesium, because the second was related to the transition of cesium. But they do something much more brilliant. They say they related that to the speed of light in vacuum here. You see, this is now the speed of light is fixed exactly, and we say the length which is traveled by light in 1 second is this fraction of a meter. And this is the definition, actually, we see generalized here in 2018. So you see, we had an evolution of the definition, and this goes with an evolution of the precision of the measurement. With a different precision, here is the absolute uncertainty, and here is a relative uncertainty. And you see that today we can measure distances with a relative uncertainty of 10 to the minus 10. And not only on the 1 meter scale, but on astronomical scales, because if you do lunar ranging, well, you will have a precision of 10 to the minus 11 on the Earth moon distance, so basically of 100 on a length of 100 of kilometers. And with interferometry, you reach 10 to the minus 19 at the nanometer level. So on all the range, on all the range of lengths, you will have such an accuracy. With the kilogram, it's not the same because you had a very good precision on the kilogram, but when you want to measure microgram or tons, the accuracy was less. So now when we will shift to this new definition, we will also gain an accuracy on all the mass scale, which is also very important. So then, you see, we define the meter with respect to the Earth, and there is this beautiful quote by Maxwell in 1870. He said, well, if we wish to define standards of length mass, which shall be absolutely permanent, we must seek them not in the dimension and motion of our planet, but in the wavelength and period of vibrations and absolute mass of these imperishable and unalterable and perfectly similar molecules. What he meant by molecule is what we call today atoms. And he realized that the Earth, the shape of the Earth may change. I mean, you can, if the temperature is changing, it can dilate, there could be like a drift of continent, whatever. This is not permanent. The shape and the mass of the Earth is not permanent enough to define our system of units. And the goal is to look for the most fundamental object, because the most fundamental object of physics, they cannot transform in something else, basically. And this is this idea here to consider molecules. So the atoms. And this is actually what has been done with the definition of the 60s. And almost at the same time, George Johnston Snell, who was an Irish physicist, he was working on electrolysis. He was able to get an idea of the charge of the electron. And he said, well, actually, we can define the unit of mass, time, and length by using the gravitational constant, the velocity of light, and the charge of the electron. And this is what was generalized by Max Planck. And Max Planck said, you see, if we use the fundamental constant, if the laws of physics are universal, and every civilization will come with the laws of physics, of course, they will have defined like a meter like that or like that, so the numerical value of the fundamental constant in each civilization will be very different. But if they all decide to set the numerical value of this fundamental constant to some value, for instance, 1, they will get the same notion of a meter, of a second, and of a kilogram. So basically, that fundamental constant offers us a way to define a system of units independently of any material object, just looking for them in the laws of physics. So it raised the question of what is a fundamental constant. And as I said, 1999, I didn't know what was a fundamental constant, so I went to the dictionary. So the best place to look what you don't know anything. And this is what is written in the dictionary. Numerical value of some quantity that allows to characterize the body. Quantity whose value is fixed, example, mass, charge of the electron, speed of light, and that plays a transient role in physical theories. So this is a very bad definition. Actually, it should be removed from the dictionary, and I've been even talking with people to change the definition in the dictionary. The reason is that actually it explains nothing. When you see that, some quantities, how many quantities, how many constants do we have in nature? We are given some examples. Is the mass of the electron the same thing as the speed of light? Are they on the same level of universality? We don't know. They play a central role in the law of physics, but I have no idea what role they play in the law of physics. Actually, when I read this definition, I didn't know what it was. So it has to be explained. And can they vary? And according to the dictionary, no, because they say whose value is fixed. So you see, you define something by the you actually assign a property to some object instead of verifying this property and say that it characterizes the object. So you reverse, you impose something by definition, and this was one of the big problems because I think 20 years ago, when the first talk I gave on this subject was, are constant varying? And people were telling, well, this is, you don't have to ask such a question. No. Actually, you have to think about the fact that the words limit what you are thinking, and you have to be very careful about the word you use to talk about science. Okay, so if I forget about the definition, I want to know what constants are. The best things to do is like entomology, you are looking for constants. So you take books of physics, and you see in books, at the end, there are always tables of fundamental constants, and you see that these tables, they are changing with time. If you take a book in the 18th century, you will not find the Planck constant, that's for sure. And some constants that were there before have disappeared. So you see that this list of the number we consider as fundamental constant are not the same over time. And then you ask yourself why? Well, it's clear. Because this is related to the theory we suppose give a good description of nature at a given time. And so the best way to define a fundamental constant is to say, well, let us start not by the constant, but the theories that we assume describe well the phenomenon of nature we know. We have theoretical physics. We have physical laws. And in these laws, you have parameters which are not determined by the theory itself for many reasons. There is nothing more fundamental to express this quantity in terms of other quantities. You have no equation to solve for these quantities. So the only thing you can do is measure them. And if when you measure them, you have the reproducibility of the experiment, at the accuracy of your measurements on the time scale of the reproducibility of this experiment, you have to check that the value remain constant. If you see drift, then it means that your theory is not compatible with your experiment because you have something which should be assumed constant, which changes with time. So you have to change your theory. So the definition would be that the fundamental constants are all the free parameters of a theory. And they cannot be determined by the theory. We need to measure them, which is very important. It also means that this quantity shall be measurable. You see a lot of theories of physics where people have numbers which are not measurables. You cannot do anything because you cannot predict them and you cannot measure them. So you're doing philosophy or poetry, which I like also. But the number and status will change with time because our knowledge of physics will change so that the theory will change and you will have some constant which will disappear, some constant which will appear. And sometimes the way you think about this constant will change. So today, we have to say what are the laws of physics describing nature, and I would claim that general relativity gives a good description of gravitation, and that the non-gravitational interactions, so nuclear and forces and electromagnetism and the particles are described by the standard model of particle physics. And we know that this is not the end of the story because we know that in this standard model, the neutrinos have no mass. Well, we know that today neutrinos have mass, but we don't have a consensus on a theory which describes this neutrino with a mass. We know there is physics beyond the standard model. We don't know which one. So I want to be conservative. If I do that, I make the list of all the free parameters of the theory. There are 22 fundamental constants. And I can pick 3 of them, like say speed of light, Planck constant, and Newton constant to fix the units. And then I end up with 19 free parameters to which I have to add the cosmological constant also. So it's either 19 if you don't do cosmology or 20 if you are a little bit bugged with cosmology. And you know that they are all measured with precise accuracy. And so this is important, which means that we know everything, and this theory will become predictable. So the next question is that if we look at this list of constants, are they all on the same footing? And then there was a very nice paper from the 70s by Jean-Marc Lévy-Leblanc who was to try this, to define what is the notion of universality of a fundamental constant. And he said, well, let me try to make some categories. I will call class A the constant which characterizes a given physical system. For instance, well, the mass of the electron is the mass of the particle. The physical system I call the electron. This is part of its definition. Then there are some constants which characterize the class of physical phenomena. This is the case of the charge of the electron, because of course, it is a class A object, it's the charge of the particle I call the electron, but then when you understand better physics, you know this is a unit charge. So all particles will have a charge which will be a fraction, a number, an integer number type of the charge of the electron. So it characterizes all the electromagnetic interaction. And then you have constants that appear everywhere in the laws of nature, and this is the case, for instance, of the speed of light, the Planck constant, and the gravitational constant. So the idea, let me take the speed of light. Of course, at the beginning, it was the speed of the physical phenomena we call light. So it was a class A phenomena. It was actually very badly defined because you have to say with respect to which referential you define the speed of light. And then with Maxwell, we have this paper and this conclusion in his book on electromagnetism, in which he shows that the speed of propagation of any waves in vacuum has the same speed, and this is exactly 1 over square root of permittivity times permeability of the vacuum. So you see, this is related to fundamental constant. And he says, well, this is the speed of light actually characterizes all electromagnetic phenomena. And with special relativity, we know the central role of the speed of light. This is a limiting velocity. It tells us that when v over c is smaller than 1, we are in a non-relativistic regime. When it's close to 1, we have relativistic effect. And basically, it shows that you have to go from space and time to a new structure, which is a space-time. And it enters in all discussion about causality. Whatever the physical phenomena which we have to consider, it has to be compatible with special relativity. So for any of these 3 constants, you can do something like that. So this is A, B, C. And you'll see that the change of status of the constant will come when actually we are forced by the fact that theories will give some different prediction about the same phenomena, as there is a kind of collision between the ontology of different theories. For instance, thermodynamic and the black body was not compatible with electromagnetism, and this is basically what Planck realized in 1900, and he has to reconcile the notion of energy and the notion of energy and momenta with the notion of wavelengths and frequency. And to do that, because they are not commensurable, you need to introduce a new constant, and this is the Planck constant, and then you realize that this is the real constant that allows you to say when quantum effects are important. So basically, you see that you will have some merging of theories, you will extend the domain of validity of this theory, and actually, the fundamental constant allows us to design, to make a new concept emerge from the pre-existing concept. And then when you will turn this constant to a very small value, you will see how your new concept, the concept of space-time, for instance, or wave function, will give back the concept of particle or the concept of waves that you had before. So they are very important in the understanding of the evolution of ideas in physics. So when you do that, you realize that this fundamental constant allows you to set the order of magnitude of many phenomena, to forge this new concept, and they are really linked to the structure of the physical theories. And hence, they allow us to characterize the domain of validity. And this is also a very important point, because a theory without its domain of validity has not really real sense. You really need to always characterize this domain of validity. So the definition I would favor is something like that. Any parameter not determined by the theory we are using at a given moment of the history. You see, it's basically a definition which is not a definition, because you need to know what is a theory of physics, but I think this is the only definition which makes sense. And then when you look at your list of fundamental constants, you will be able to pick 3 them, which I will call base units, which have dimension, for instance, the speed of light, the gravitational constant, and the Planck constant. And you can fix their numerical value to whatever number you want, and it will define you what is the meter, the kilogram, and the second. Once you have done that, all other constants will be dimensionless. For instance, the ratio of mass to the proton to mass of the electron, it will be 1800, whatever the definition of the kilogram you choose, whatever the definition of the speed of light or the Planck constant you decide to take. And so they will be independent of all units. And their value is important, because now if you change the value of this dimensionless number, you change the magnitude of many physical effects. If you change the value of the fine structure constant or a ratio between mass of the electron and the proton, some atom may be stable or unstable, and it will change the world in which we live. So we can ask the question whether these numbers are changing. Why are are their value fine-tuned or not? And this is kind of discussion we have today in cosmology. So you see there are 2 different sets of constants. The first one allows us to define the fundamental units, and you cannot say whether they are changing or not, because to say that something is changing, you need to compare with something that you know is not changing, which is not possible, because any measurement is just a comparison. So now let me make a connection with gravity, and I will focus on the dimensionless quantity. So you see all the definition of the unit system was based on the constant with units, and now I am left with all these other constants which have no dimensions. And the question is whether this quantity can change with time, and whether we can say something on their value. So in general relativity, we had a principle, which is the Einstein equivalent principle, which is related on 3 statements: the universality of free fall, the fact that 2 objects fall in an external gravitational field in the same way independently of the chemical composition and mass, and the local and Lorentz and position invariance, which generalizes basically the invariance from special relativity. And position invariance just tells you that this is the universality of the laws of physics. If I'm doing a spectroscopy experiment here on Earth today, on the moon in 10,000 years, I will get the same result. And if you have this, well, you can show that gravity is, you can argue that gravity is a geometric phenomena. So basically, you will have a metric describing gravity, and that all matter fields are universality coupled to this metric tensor. So this principle, it's a purely empirical fact. There is no reason to why it's like that. We have just seen that it is like that. We are testing this principle, and it's very important in general relativity. And But the question is that if it's not valid, then we can wonder whether there is just the need for 1 or 2 kilograms. And this is what I want you to think about. So now, what about if constant were changing with time, so the dimensionless quantities, you will see that first the local position invariance will be violated. Imagine the Weizsäcker constant is different here and on the moon. I do a spectroscopy measurement. I measure alpha. It doesn't give the same result. So that will violate this quantity. Then you can also show that it will imply that the universality of free fall will be violated. And a very hand-waving way to see it is that if you take the mass of a test body, this is the mass of its constituent plus the binding energy, and these things will depend basically on all fundamental constants. Now imagine that the constants are changing in space and time. It means that the mass of this test body will change along its trajectory. So instead of having dp over dt equals 0, so the conservation of the momenta, which gives you that you are going at a constant velocity if there is no force applied on your system, you will see that you will have that 0 is just the mass time acceleration, plus a term which depends on how the constant changes on the trajectory, proportional to v. So you will have an anomalous acceleration, and this term will also depend on the chemical composition. Just think that the electromagnetic binding energy is not the same for different nuclei. It depends on alpha, it depends on the number of protons, the number of neutrons. So basically, if you have a space-time variation of the fundamental constant, you expect to have a violation of the universality of free fall. From a Newtonian point of view, it also means that the two notions of mass, the inertial mass and gravitational, may not agree. And in the introduction of the Principia, Newton is very clear about that. He said that there are two different notions of masses, and we distinguish them only by the way that we think about them. And it's very important to make a difference between them. So the inertial mass is basically the relation between the force and the acceleration. And the gravitational mass gives you what is the weight of a body with mass mg, so in a local gravitational field g. So you have these two notions of masses. Actually, you have three, because if you look at the force, the Newton force between two objects A and B, it's the ratio of the mass, but one is the source of the gravitational field, and the other one is the coupling to the gravitational field. So this is what we call the active and passive gravitational mass. But if you have the action-reaction law, so the first force on A by B and B on A is the same, it means that you have this equality, which means that the ratio for any object of the active to passive gravitational mass is constant. So you can always choose it to be 1, but still you are left with two different notions of masses. And they are different in the sense that for gravitational mass, if you measure them with a scale, you will be in a gravitational field. But now if I do collisions to define the mass, I will measure the inertial mass. And so do I need an inertial kilogram and a gravitational kilogram? So this is one of the questions we could be worried about. So how to know that? But the basic is to look at the dynamic of falling objects in an external gravitational field, object 1 and 2, and you look at this parameter eta, which gives you the difference of their acceleration. If the equivalence principle is valid, it should be strictly 0. And you see that if you take Newton's second law and the definition of weight, you have that the acceleration is not given by the acceleration of gravity, but there is the mg, so the ratio between inertial and gravitational mass in each center. Just think the simplest object you can think of, like a swing. So you have this equation of motion, and the pulsation is not square root of g over L. L is the length of the swing. You have this extra factor, which is square root of mg over mi. So you take two swings with different chemical composition, and you see that if this factor is not equal, you will have a small shift given by this eta, which is the difference of the pulsation of the two swings. So you can compare the swing of two pendulums and see whether this parameter can be large or not. And this is what has been done. As you know, the universality of free fall was first alluded to by Galileo. If you take the numbers, I mean, we don't know about the experiment, but you just take the height of the tower and everything and the accuracy of the time you can measure at the time. And basically, you get that you cannot do better than 10% on the validity of the universality of free fall with such an experiment. And then Newton, Bessel did this experiment with swing, and they reached 10 to the minus 3, 10 to the minus 5. And then we use torsion balance to reach 10 to the minus 7 or 9. And then we do to lunar ranging to reach 10 to the minus 13. And we also reach 10 to the minus 13 in the laboratory. And with microscope, we get 1 order of magnitude higher. So you see, this principle is still valid, which means that at 10 to the minus 14, we can say that we just need one definition of a kilogram. But if we see a violation of this universality of free fall, we will have also to rethink the way we define units. Maybe we will need, there will be one new charge in nature, and we will need to introduce a new unit. So this is just an advertisement that, because some of us, and in particular Martin, has been working on microscope, which gives a new constraint, which is typically a 10 to the minus 14 with 10% of the data. So from a physical point of view, is it easy to make theories with varying fundamental constant? Actually, it's very easy. If you start with the expression of a theory in terms of an action, you have fields, and usually you get one equation by varying with respect to each field, and then you have parameters that you assume constant. They are just there, you can only measure them. And so now imagine that you want a theory which this parameter is now varying. What you will do is that you will consider it as a field, so it will go there. There will be one more equation by varying to this quantity, and the equation that you have been deriving by varying to this quantity will also be changed. So basically, this will be completely consistent. Nevertheless, I think it was around 2000, there was like a huge load of papers on varying speed of light theories, where people were making the speed of light vary in the equation. Equations that were derived under the hypothesis that the speed of light is constant. So it was flawed. So they say there is a problem with conservation of energy, with whatever. Everything it's true, because you have a parameter which can vary with space and time, and you have no law of evolution. As I said, if you have no law of evolution, the only thing you can assume is that this quantity is constant. But now if you want to do your varying speed of light in a correct way, you will get also an equation for the evolution of this quantity, and you will have new parameters, and everything will be consistent. So this is very important that at the theoretical level, you can do that in a very consistent way. And there are now many models of deviation from general relativity who have such variation of fundamental constant, and this is also one of the topics of the PhD thesis by Martin. So do we know if these fundamental constants are constant? And then I will go a bit fast. So as I said, I will consider only constants which have no units, because any measurement is just a comparison between two physical systems of units. I repeat that many times because I still receive mail every day almost saying it's not correct. Okay, so what will you do? You take a system, you have an observable, which I call O, and the value of this observable depends on what I will call primary physical parameters, let's say the binding energy of some transition, so things you find in book and you assume to be constant. And external parameters like the temperature of the system, the chemical composition of the system. Usually what you do, you measure O, and you want to learn something about your physical system, assuming that these parameters are the one you find in book, so the one measured here on Earth today. So the idea to say, well, can we measure these quantities also in the physical system I am studying? And it will be possible if the value of this observable depends a lot on a change of these primary physical parameters. So basically, I will define the sensitivity as a change of the observable when I change one of these fundamental constants. And there are systems for which it's large, but for systems for which it's not. If I take an experiment of spectroscopy, it doesn't depend on the gravitational constant. So no use to try to measure it with a spectrometer. And then these parameters, they are not the fundamental constant I showed in in the first slide with all the thing from the standard model of particle physics. They could be like binding energy, resonance energy, and you have to know how these quantities are related to the fundamental constant. And this link is very difficult. If you want to calculate the mass of the proton in terms of the mass of the quark and fundamental constant, actually no one knows. You have some recipe, but and we have been doing that with Skisolive, and we show that there could be like one order of magnitude in the prediction you make to the sensitivity of the mass of the proton to different fundamental constants. So what system can we use? So in the laboratory, we can compare atomic clocks. It will depend basically on the Fine-Schreiber constant, the ratio between mass of the electron and mass of the proton, and the gyromagnetic factor. This can be generalized in astrophysics by looking to quasar absorption spectra, which will depend on the same quantity. But then you will have some hypotheses about the chemical composition of your absorbing clouds. In particular, if you have different isotopes, it will shift the line. If you have a magnetic field, if you have a bulk flow and so on, it will make modification in your spectrum. You have the Oklo reactor, which was operating 2 billion years ago. So this is nuclear physics, and you can measure the resonance energy of an absorption reaction in the samarium. But again, the conclusion you will get will depend on the geophysical model of the reactor. You can use meteorite dating of the solar system to measure the lifetime of some nuclei, and it will have some hypotheses on the scenario for the solar system formation. And then you can go to cosmology, use the CMB, so you measure temperature and polarization anisotropy. It will mostly depend on this parameter, but actually some other one. And it will depend on the cosmological parameters, because you will have a CL, and if you don't know well enough your cosmological parameters, you will not be able to make huge constraint on that. And Big Bang nucleosynthesis, so a couple of minutes after the Big Bang, you will have the abundance of light elements, and it will depend on a long series of parameters, and also depend on the cosmological models. So I don't know, in 5 minutes, I will just show you where we stand today, and not try to describe all of these systems. So atomic clocks, if you take the transition, let's say a hyperfine structure transition and an electronic transition, you see that they don't have the same dependence in alpha, in mu, and the geomagnetic factor. So if you take two clocks, you compare two clocks, and you see whether these clocks keep time in the same way, or whether one clock drifts with respect to the other one. So because of the definition of the second, in any lab there is a cesium clock, and you can compare different clocks to the cesium clock. And the best constraint we got, it has been improved a little bit, is when we compare aluminum clock and mercury clock, and you get that they do not drift by more than 10 to the 17 per year. Okay, 10 to the 17 per year. And so because this comparison of clock depends just on alpha, this is also the order of magnitude you have on the local time drift of the fine structure constant today. So you see it's about 10 order of magnitude smaller than the accuracy we had on the definition of fundamental constant, and so on and so on. So it's really safe. For astrophysics, I told that to Patrick Petitjean, just to remind you that if you have a quasar, you observe this quasar, the light of the quasar is going through different absorbing clouds. So basically, you have absorption, and you have redshift, and the combination of redshift and absorption makes you that you have like all this absorption light, and you have also absorption light for heavier nuclei here, and you can try it. So basically, this is paleospectra. You measure the wavelengths of some transition at different times in the history of the universe, and you can compare them with spectra in the laboratory. So it has been done extensively. So here is just a couple of systems on different, with different methods and different nuclei. And basically what you see is that you are at the level of 10 to the minus 5 on a time scale which is basically from 5 to 10 gigayears. And this is basically when it went down to. But remember that there was a huge debate between the team by John Webb and the team by Patrick Petitjean on the way you interpret this data, and so on and so on. Eventually, they came to all work together as a VLT. So now everyone agrees that we don't see any variation which is more than 10 to the minus 5 in relative value, let's say on a time scale of 10 gigayears. Then there is a CMB, and that was done by the Planck team. We, principally with Sylvia and Simon, we try to go through the whole effect of fundamental constant, in particular in the dynamic of the recombination of hydrogen and helium. But you have to be aware that it also includes the gravitational dynamics. So basically, the prediction will depend on the gravitational constant alpha and me. But I said that only dimensionless number counts. So if I say mass, it's not. So when I will say mass now, but what I will consider is G me squared divided by h bar c, which has no dimension. And this is really the parameters that enter the game here. And what you can see is that if you go through the Boltzmann equation with the recombination, you will be able to predict the effect of a variation. So this is a 5% variation of alpha of the angular power spectrum. And you see that there is an effect which actually will be, I mean, we have to consider a very high L to see, to break the degeneracy between mass of the electron and alpha. And these are the data. So you see with such data, you can make the difference, and you see that the 5% is really easy to get. And this is basically what was done here. And so you have the constraint by W map here and the one by Planck. And what is interesting is that you break the degeneracy between GME squared and alpha. So that was something very interesting to get. And I think to me it will be very difficult to go beyond such a limit. And you see, at the level of 10 to the minus 3. And as I said, this is also, I mean, given the error bar we have on the cosmological parameters, it's, we cannot think that we can go like 1 order or 2 of magnitude better for this kind of thing. Then you go through nuclear physics. And as I said, there are many parameters. So the game, and we played it with Elisabeth and with Alain Koch, was to see how if you take the lighter elements, so this is a reduced system of the 12 most important nuclear reactions to get the light elements. You had a beautiful seminar by Cyril a couple of weeks ago on how to do if you want to include all other reactions. And you predict the abundance of lithium, deuterium, helium-3, and helium. And the first idea is that, you see, the binding energy of deuterium, the lifetime of neutron, and so Q is the difference of mass between the neutron and the proton, they depend from the same fundamental constant. But the way they depend on this constant will depend on some hypothesis about the theory, and we are not able actually to know how the variation of this parameter will be correlated in a given theoretical framework. So the first idea would say, okay, assume that they can vary independently, and you see how these curves will change. And it was 2006, and there was a very nice surprise at the time, is that there was a possibility by changing the binding energy of deuterium, you see, to be in this region where lithium was reconciled with observation, and you were marginally compatible with deuterium, helium-3, and helium-4 was still working. So that was 2006. And then, since then, the error bar of deuterium has been shrunk by what, a factor 5 or so, something like that. And this possibility was completely ruled out, and now you just have to be here. So this is also very interesting, is that 10 years ago, there was this kind of window of opportunity to say, well, maybe in such model you can solve the lithium problem. But after the fact that we have this new data, we are coming to constraint on the variation of fundamental constant, which are at the level of 10 to the minus 2 approximately. So, and I think it will be very difficult to do better than this at the moment. Once we have done that with BBN, there is just one step to do that, to study the evolution of stars, in particular population 3 stars. And we study the evolution of the variation of fundamental constant on the oil state, so the 3 alpha reaction to produce carbon in population 3 stars. And that was very interesting, because then if you change the efficiency of the nuclear reaction, you can end up with very strange stars. Some stars with a magnesium core, or some stars with almost no carbon and just pure carbon and no oxygen. And if you say, well, I want this star to produce a ratio of carbon to oxygen which is roughly of order unity, so you should be in this region, you get up that you should not vary these parameters, the fundamental parameter, by more than a fraction of 10 to the minus 2, so approximately 10 to the minus 2 to 10 to the minus 3. And so this is interesting, because this is the existence of the oil state was a kind of argument in the fine-tuning and for, you see, the entropic principle and so on. And now the question is how fine-tuned this is. And when I go to conferences, some people say, you know, 1 in 1,000, this is not fine-tuning, and some people, this is a catastrophe, so I don't know. And it's normal that I don't know, because whatever the fine-tuning, if you don't have a measure in the space of this fundamental constant, you can claim whatever you want. And I think this is why the debate is flawed there. But the point is that you can actually make predictions. So this is just an order of magnitude, because it depends on the mass of the star. So you should know the whole spectrum of stars if you want to compare to observation, which we are not able to do. And this was not actually the goal. The goal was really to think what is the sensitivity of the production of carbon in population 3 stars if you change the fundamental parameters. So just to end up this overview of the landscape, this is the light cone. So we are here today. We go in the past. So these stars, the redshift, which are increasing toward the past. We have atomic clocks, and we are typically at 10 to the minus 17 per year today. We have the Oklo phenomena, so redshift 0.14, which is typically at 10 to the minus 7 in for a relative variation of alpha. On the datation of the solar system, typically 10 to the minus 7. And we have absorption spectra between redshift of 0.2 and, let's say, up to 4, which is at a level to 10 to the minus 5. And then we have new system, like population 3 stars. We may get something with 21 centimeter. On this redshift band between 15 and 100, and CMB and BBN at 1000 and 10 to the 8, which are typically of 10 to the minus 2, which you can push to 10 to the minus 3 if you really want. And this is basically the landscape, and it tells you that in our observable universe, we don't expect to have variation larger than this for this fundamental constant. Okay, so this is something which was not the case about 15 years ago when I started that. The constant, I mean, they were very mild constraint on all these systems, and some of the systems actually were not studied before. So I will stop here. Just make a small summary, the fact that Well, this new SI was a very nice opportunity to think on the role of this fundamental constant, the role they play in the laws of physics, and the fact that we define everything with respect just to a clock, to me, is in full agreement with the philosophy of general relativity. We are just observers with our own clock, and this is all we need. And all this is also the long historical, the endpoint of a long historical process, and it's nice to see how ideas evolve in science and how you have to forge new concepts, and make the distinction between the constant we use to define the units and the other, which are dimensionless, and for which it is physically meaningful to ask whether they are constant or not, because if they are not, then we have a clue on beyond the standard model physics, which we may or may not detect in our universe. And basically, this is what I will stop here. And as I said, I started to do that because I understood nothing. I was not planning to do that when I was starting my postdoc. So this is it. Thank you. Attends. If you want, I have some stickers about the new international system left. So they are here. Yes, I know there are some geeks in the room, so.
Some question.
Jean-Philippe, that was illuminating. There is one change that affects us all astronomers that took place a few years ago. That was the redefinition of the astronomical unit, also, which is now fixed. Can you comment on that? Because this involved directly the gravitational constant, etc. I was somehow surprised that you didn't mention it.
I didn't mention it because this text on the International System of Units didn't mention the astronomical unit. It's not supposed to be an official unit of length. Okay, so you have the...
That's in the same spirit, so perhaps you have a comment on the way people thought that this should be now not measured, but with a precise number.
So I don't have like deep thought on this, but this is, so after these changes, so many communities have started to see whether the units they are using internally are consistent with these new definitions and whether they should bring new definition. And I know in particular with reference systems and in particular after Gaia, people have been rethinking to the way to redefine actually the astronomical distances. But I've not given more thought about that. It's more of an internal debate. It doesn't change. So the relation will be how many meters is an astronomical unit and what is the most stable definition you have. Because you know that if you are thinking about the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, this is not something which is completely stable. So what do you assume for that? What is the stability, the time scale you need for this stability and the accuracy you need given the new astrometric observation? So it's more about, you see, the fact that people are actually using these units, okay, and it's a very practical point of view.
So you are making some statement about the equivalence principle and suggesting that if there is a violation of the equivalence principle, seen by microscope for instance, then we will need to define another unit because there will be 2 kilograms, one inertial and one gravitational. But I would disagree with the statement because I will interpret the violation of the equivalence principle as the existence of a new field, for instance, a dilatonic field, and this new field will have a new coupling constant, which will be expressed in our current system of units. And actually, I think that it will be very difficult to imagine what would be a new field or a new physics which will need a new fundamental unit. For instance, our system is based on electromagnetism, relativity, quantum mechanics, and thermodynamics, and gravitation fits into that, strong and weak interactions fit into that, and so on. Do you agree?
I think we fully agree, because this is what I said. I said either we need 2 kilograms, which was more like a joke, or we will need a new charge. And when I say we need a new charge, it's exactly what you are saying. Is the day we discover electromagnetism, we have to invent something for the charge of the electron. So it came with a new unit. Okay, so this will be exactly the same, but you will have one more unit, and I'm sure, like with the theory, you will be able to relate that to the fact you have to define two different kind of kilograms. But again, if this charge will, if the kilogram will depend on the chemical composition of the object, we will have to be much more careful about the way we define mass and about the way we measure mass. But given the 10 to the minus 15, and we are at 10 to the minus 8 for the realization of the kilogram in the laboratory, I think we are safe from a practical point of view. But I completely agree that from a theoretical point of view, there will be something deep to understand there.
More question? No? Yes.
If there are no more questions, I would like to ask something which is maybe more related to sociology than physics. How come that during this big cleanup, you didn't manage to kick out the candela? Why is it still there? What's the story behind this?
Okay, so I've not been in this committee, so I cannot tell you, but you see, there is these two things about the mole and the candela. And if you talk with people who have been in the committee, I think it's due to the fact that, as you say, there are sociology, and you want people from chemistry and the industry to be also part and to use this unit of this system of units. The mole was not in the system at the beginning, and then they put the mole so that chemists actually were feeling that they are involved in the system. And for the candela, this was when we had the development of all electricity and lighting industry, that they needed to have their proper units. So that could be like sociology. It's not only sociology, because we are physicists and we forget also about the importance of such a system for the society. If I make lamps and I want to sell lamps, I don't know, in Germany or in the States, I need to have certification with a given accuracy. And the fact that we agree on the definition for all units of the things that we want to trade is very important to think about the global trade. There is a very good, nice book by Ken Adler about the meter, and in the introductory part, he says that for him, the invention of the meter was the starting point of the globalization of economy, and actually he's trying to put some number about how much money it created, and you see, like, theoretical ideas can boost, can have amazing impact on economy. So that's the point, and people, especially with quantum technology now, they need this accuracy to have certification. The Laboratoire National d'Essai is not only realizing the units, but they have all these branches where they make all your certification for the product you want to sell and export. And then you need to have these units which are not as fundamental as we want in the system, because this is a system which is used for human purpose. And also there is this thing that, it's very nice that we have been able to do to fundamental constant as theoretical physicists wanted to, but we achieved there when it was shown that the accuracy was, on the everyday life will not be affected by this change of definition. It's a practical system of units, and it's not just pure theory. In theory, it's very easy. You put CGH equal 1, and then that's done. You don't care about measurement. But then you want to measure, you want to sell, and you want to reproduce with a given accuracy. And this is the purpose of this international system of units. So it has some flaws, but I think it's also part of its beauty because it has all this history.
More question? No. Okay. No? Okay. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.